And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. And this week I'm going to be talking with Jake West, who I'll introduce in just a couple of minutes. But before I do so, I just have to do the usual shout outs and just say thank you to everyone who subscribed to the YouTube channel. I said it was about 460 odd last week. It's now 498 subscribers to the YouTube channel. So we're close to that magic 500. As I say, it's no real significance, except it's a nice round number. So that's brilliant. I'm really, really pleased about that. So thank you to everybody. And thank you to everybody for your enthusiastic support of the podcast. I'm really, really, really blown away by the fact that we've had about 133 downloads so far in the United Kingdom, United States, Germany, Canada, Ireland, France, and Australia, which makes it a truly international podcast. So really thank you to everybody who's downloaded some of the podcasts. Jake's podcast will be up in the next couple of days. There's a couple of others from the vaults that I'm going to be sharing with you before Christmas. And then after Christmas, in January, again, there'll be quite a few more from the vaults, as well as the shows that I'm doing. But yeah, that's all I've done. So Jake, hi.
Hello. Hey, Nicholas. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing.
It is in the UK.
So I wanted to talk about what is I think your current project, which is Feral. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. I've been working on I've co-written a werewolf film, which is a high concept werewolf movie, where we have an air hostess who gets attacked in an animal attack on a layover. But the animal turns out to be a werewolf. She doesn't know this. She gets back on her flight, and then halfway across the Atlantic, the inevitable happens, and there's a big problem. So that was a script that I co-wrote with a fantastic Irish writer, a guy called Spencer Wright, who genre fans may know from a film he did called Red Mist, which was a really interesting movie as well. So we've been working on this. It's our real kind of love letter to werewolf and action movies, and we think it's going to really, really be a fun one for everyone.
It sounds really, I think it's that thing of, it's like Snakes on a Plane and all those things where basically you put a really big threat inside a plane. So yeah, that sounds really, really exciting. How close to where are you up to in the process?
Well, we have done concept designs on the creature. We've been wrecking some locations. We're looking at shooting like maybe 80% of it on a real plane. Which is yes, so really using the environment of a closed-in space, which with a very big kind of beast in that environment gives the characters, a kind of geographical, interesting kind of environment just to play around in. So we basically I've got a couple of producers attached to the movie, and it's a case of them closing the deals and seeing if we can get the money. If all being well, that will shoot early next year, hopefully. But it's the film industry, so you never know exactly when the finance is going to come together. So yeah. we need the film gods to align it for us. But we'll see. I'm very confident about it, and it's a great little script.
It's cool. How long have you been working on that? Did you say?
Feral probably now for about a year from the original concept to where we're at. So I mean, getting the script to a point where you're happy to send it out, and then trying to get it to actors who can help you get the film financed. It just takes a long time, and you've got to be 100% happy, but that you're ready to go with it really before you start.
Right. And as I say, this is all part of the great joy of this filmmaking. If you can get a big name actor involved, that helps bring in the finance.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the film industry increasingly is going the way of that. To a lot of the way films are sold these days, you tend to have a name actor in there to really help the distribution of it. Unless you go very low budget, then but the middle ground of those kind of medium budgets seems to have gone now. So it's quite rare you get lower budget films now getting cinema releases in the UK. They tend to go straight to VOD platforms, and the world is changing on that front, which makes it just even more difficult to get indie horror stuff done.
Right, and presumably because this is a werewolf movie, funnily enough, I have a werewolf script in the works at the moment as well.
Every self-respecting horror person wants to do a werewolf film.
Absolutely. Oh, they're just such a great thing. It's based on one of my short stories, and it's like I've already looked into it, and and kind of discuss it's the transformation. You know, this is the thing that's always going to be the big challenge, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of exciting thing about a werewolf film, is this idea of transformation, which is a theme that we have that runs through the entire narrative, actually. You know, the idea that it's not just the werewolf that transforms, it's the lives of all the people that have to fight it. So you have a kind of, on a metaphorical level, you have different layers of different transformations throughout the movie, which is really nice, because I think that's what horror does well. You can develop a theme in a way that people don't always expect, you know, so you can unify your narrative in a much more satisfying way if you really kind of go through all of those beats.
Right. Yeah, no, that yes, it's basically how do people react in a particular situation.
But in terms of the actual physical transformation, the makeup, from a kind of makeup and prosthetics point of view, that is really interesting. And you know, one of the things that I wanted to do from the beginning was actually have visualizations on what the werewolf is going to look like, and trying to make it different from other werewolves you've seen, and you know how you get it there. And you know, I like physical creatures rather than CG creations, so it's going to be like 80% physical the way we do this, with an actual performer, but maybe with some CG enhancements, but in a very, very sort of subtle way. That's what we want to try and do with it.
Right. Yeah, okay. Well, that sounds very good. Okay, well, cross fingers about that, and when it's all up and
fingers crossed.
Cross everything.
Everything.
Absolutely. So, you know, when that actually happens, and I look forward to that, then we'll have you back on again. You know, once the film's actually done, we'll talk about it.
I would be very happy to be talking about it having made it, because you know, it's always dangerous talking about a project you haven't made, because sometimes it feels a bit, you know, cursed when you talk about it, and then if it doesn't happen, I'm now on record talking about this film. So I really, you know, but we're very determined. We think it's just a matter of when rather than if with this one, because we're so happy with the script. You know, everyone who's read it loves it, basically.
Right. I mean, no, exactly. I mean, I remember talking about Clive, talking to Clive about this, and it's just like, just never talk about it until it's done, Nick.
Yeah,
it's the same way.
There is always a danger, but you asked me the other day what I was doing, so there's a couple of other things I've got bubbling as well, but I don't want to talk about some of those just in case they don't happen. But to be honest, 2017 could be a good year for me, or it could be another one where, you know, it's very much dependent on money these days with film, you know. So we are in that situation of just getting, you know, the finance for this.
No, and I think that, having talked to other independent filmmakers, I think everyone is the same thing. The landscape has changed so much, and as you say, basically with a werewolf, if you're going to have a lot of practical effects, that's going to cost money, and it's
definitely. I mean, you've got to spend money on the werewolf, and also the environment. You know, we've got a very contained environment, but also there's certain things we want to do within that which are quite challenging. So, you know, those things have to be done properly. But if we get a chance to do it, then I think the audience will love it.
Cool. And you said you're collaborating. Sorry, and I missed Spencer. Did you say? Sorry.
Yeah, Spencer Wright. Yes.
Spencer Wright. Oh God, the memory is still working.
How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, hopefully you're watching, Spencer. You're saying collaborating. How do you collaborate on the script?
Well, we actually wrote a script about a year or so ago, which was a supernatural story that we both really like, and that's still bubbling away. It's in the background with another producer. But we're both horror fans, and we just really enjoyed working with each other. I mean, we've met up physically, but on this script, Feral, we basically did it co-wrote, but shared the writing and the ideas process mostly for a series of Skypes, actually. So we send each other the scripts, and we rewrite bits the other person doesn't do, and it's just I really like. It's a nice way of working. But me and Spence have very similar tastes on how we think about horror and stuff like that. So it was just one of those things that it's a really enjoyable process. And I don't know, I think there's quite a few writing partnerships out there, and it's always really nice working with a writer, especially, you know, writing stuff on your own takes, well, for me, I'm quite a slow writer if I'm doing it on my own. So it's always nice to have somebody else as a sounding board to bounce backwards and forwards the ideas, you know. And I find that a much more enjoyable way to create, because writing can be quite lonely otherwise.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. I was just curious, and I think it's the mechanics of it I'm always interested in.
Because I think it's. I mean, it's more the way. I think, you know, I don't think everyone works in the same way, but myself and Spence, the way we like working is we like getting a very, very strong step outline. So we'll go from bullet point, basically the entire story. Before we actually would do any work on individual scenes, we produce like a bullet point version of the entire plot. And that can be like 10, 20 pages long sometimes. But once you've got the roadmap, then we can write the scenes. And for us, that always seems to be like a really nice way of working. And it just means that, of course, you have ideas as you're writing, but it always means you know where you're going with the story. That's a kind of way that has worked very well for us, certainly with Feral. We really enjoyed doing that.
Right. Right, cool. All right, well, that's really nice to know. And
well, writing tips for maybe other people if they want to collaborate.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. That's what I kind of like discussing on these shows as much as possible. It's just got the physical how people do these things. Okay, we'll move. As you say, lots to come on Feral in the future. We hope in the new year.
Hopefully, you'll hear lots more about it. Hopefully.
Yeah. But I know one of the other great things that you're working on at the moment is Nucleus Films. And I think the most recent project that you've been working on is Death Laid an Egg and Lady Frankenstein, the restorations, which you're going to tell me a little bit about in a moment, but just wanted to say that it's on in-demand in Indiegogo at the moment if people want copies of these movies once they're completed. Again, I've got that right?
Yes, that's correct. It's the first Indiegogo crowdfunder that myself and Mark Morris, who I run Nucleus Films with, we've been releasing cult movies on DVD since about 2003. So over 10 years we've been doing stuff. Originally, we set up Nucleus to make extras for other companies, and we make a lot of extra features for companies like Arrow Films, Anchor Bay, Screenbound, and we've done stuff like the Hellraiser box set, Phantasm box sets, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and even interviews with Alan Parker, and many extras for lots of companies. And from those extras, we then decided, well, we'd release our own movies, and we can make extras for our own releases. And Mark was talking for a long time about wanting to do some films which are very rare, that collectors have been afterwards for a long time, but they just haven't been available in decent versions. And the reason for that is that the original film materials and stuff need to be licensed from Italian licensors in this case, whose prices have always been, they've kept the prices very, very high for those films. So it's always been a bit prohibitive for an independent company to actually be able to afford to release those movies. And we felt, well, we would love to do them and go back to the original camera negatives and restore them and do 2K transfers so we could release them on Blu-ray. But we just didn't have the money to do that as being a small company. So Mark thought that doing it as the crowdfunding route would be a great idea. And, I agreed. So basically, we launched our crowdfund about just over a month ago. It's finished now on the main crowdfund, but because it was so successful, it's been picked up by Indiegogo to go in demand. So if you raise all of your money and hit all your targets, then you can keep it running for a period of time. So if people are still interested, go to the Nucleus Films Euro Cult Restoration Project page, and you can pledge and get those movies, which will be restored sometime next year. And they're both terrific Euro Cult movies. Lady Frankenstein, directed by Mel Wells, about, I think it's 1967, 1968, starring the beautiful Rosalba Neri. Fantastic Euro cult movie, kind of trashy and fun, kind of like an Italian hammer horror gothic-y type movie. And then you've got Death Laid an Egg, the Giulio Questi film, and it's much more of an artistic giallo movie with some interesting kind of social commentary mixed in with like a giallo murder, very glamorous girls. We've got Iwa Olin, who was Candy, and Gina Lollobrigida. And it's a terrific movie, very well made, very artistic as well. So a real gem.
Right. Okay. And
my sales pitch then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I knew nothing of these until I started, looking at website and something. I'd seen some stuff on my timeline and some of the stuff that you shared. So when did you first begin?
Yeah, just out of interest,
sure.
If people actually want to just see like some clips of the films and learn a bit more about it, if they jump onto my Facebook page or the Nucleus Films Facebook page, there's lots of like video stuff they can see about it as well. So if they're interested, go and have a look at the Nucleus Films Facebook page.
The Nucleus Films Facebook page. Okay, cool. When did you say these are very cult movies in Italy and so on. When did you actually first get to see these things? How is it that you know about these films in
Well,
the first instance?
well, we've been releasing cult films for a long time, and there's a bunch of movies which fans love, and it's also trying to like it's like with Arrow films that there's a lot of films that get released, and you've got, as a distributor, you're always trying to look for a movie that hasn't had a decent release before, especially if it's an older title. So but the problem with a film that hasn't had a decent release means the materials don't exist, so you have to go back and retransfer everything and create a decent master.
Right.
So it's really just looking at what collectors are interested in, like films like the best, one of the better releases of Death Laid an Egg was a German VHS release, which is like really old now, and there was a German Blu-ray, but it's really just an upscale of it's like an upscaled kind of just standard def, really. So
Right.
there hasn't been a decent version of this film, and we also, with Death Laid an Egg, we've discovered a print which is, we believe, the longest version of this film ever, with some scenes that people haven't seen before as well. So we're waiting for the report back from the lab to know exactly what the difference in that material is going to be. So it's quite exciting because we're discovering some stuff which may have never been seen before with some of this material as well. So really, it's just trying to identify titles that film fans and collectors want to see, and a lot of the credit for that I work with Mark Morris, and if some of the people out there know Mark, and maybe you would want to do one of these with him at some point.
Sure.
Mark Morris is probably regarded as one of the biggest connoisseurs of cult films in the world, probably, and he has an archive of movies, cult movies, which he's got sort of about 10,000 of these things, and he is very, very knowledgeable of it. Basically, any movie sort of earlier than 1980 to about the 1950s is that his specialist subject. If you went on Mastermind, he'd win it.
Right. That sounds like an amazing collection. So you talked about the going to the lab, and I was kind of fascinated by what does the restoration process entail. I guess somebody just gets hold of, you're saying, original film, or
well, the process is via the licenses, you contact the laboratories to find out what is held, so you want to go back to the materials, hopefully, like the original camera negatives, and that, whatever prints were originally made up. But identifying the rights owner is the first thing, then licensing the rights is the second process, and then you've got to find whether the person you're licensing the film from will then have the lab access to all of the materials, and then that gets sent to a transfer facility, and then you go and you can get everything retransferred in glorious 2K high-end telecine, so you can get a master which then needs to be graded, and if there's any kind of digital work that needs to be done to get rid of any damage, it really depends on, no one knows what these materials are going to be like until you get them, because they've been in storage probably for 40 years.
Wow. So it is a bit of a lottery as to what you're actually going to get. And how long? So when they transfer, do they just project it, or that they put it into a scanner?
You'll be in a I mean, these days you're using, I don't know if you've ever been in a tele suite, but telecine type suite, but it's where the original camera neg will be scanned through at the at an high 2K high res quality, and that's going off if you're going from the original camera negative, you'll get as much detail off, pulling as much detail off that negative as you can. So it's a technical process, and it just takes time, because film is an analog format, and you're transferring that into a digital, into something digital. But the reason for doing, obviously, we think that probably Blu-ray is the last physical format that people are going to collect and own before everything goes, basically just a list on your computer screen, But I think that in some ways, DVD, Blu-ray, it's becoming a bit like vinyl now. It's really for collectors. So we are I'm a collector myself. I've got hundreds of films, DVD and Blu-ray, probably thousands in fact, but there's something that I love the physical format, and we like creating special limited editions with booklets and postcard sets and slipcases, something that is nice to own and have on your shelf, and that's kind of what Arrow do very well, and that's something that we are always wanting to do the best possible release of anything that we can.
Right, right. And funny if uh, one of our regular viewers, Derek, hi Derek, asked slightly earlier on, that is an impressive multimedia collection Jake has behind him. I wonder what takes pride of place in the collection.
Oh, it's hard to say because that's not the whole collection. I mean, I can tip up. There's stuff at the top there, and there's other stuff sort of over there, and then there's stuff downstairs, which is in another cupboard, and that's a couple of layers deep behind me as well. I don't know.
Like me and my books. Yeah.
I don't know what we can see. I do particularly like. I don't know if you can see it up on the top shelf there. Let me pan over.
Vaguely.
Oh, that's my. Right up there. I don't know if you can see the phantasm sphere.
Yes, there's definitely a little kind of silver thing there.
Yeah.
It's not in detail, but yeah,
that is one of my favorite things I own, actually, because we did extras for the Phantasm box set, which is the Anchor Base Sphere set, if anyone's got that. It's a beautiful thing. Hold on, maybe I can grab it down quickly. Here we go.
That's gorgeous.
Phantasm Sphere set there. Look at that. How great that is. And this opens up, and there's the discs inside.
Oh wow!
And on the fourth disc is the feature length Phantasmagoria documentary that we made. Nucleus Films made that, and we got to go out to LA and interview Don Coscarelli, Angus Scott, Reggie Bannister, Michael Baldwin, pretty much everyone from the Phantasm series. And that's a 90-minute documentary, and I love making that. It's one of my favorite things, and that's probably my favorite. Probably of all the collector's things I've got, it's probably my favorite. But there are a lot of other nice things up there.
I have just a quick aside about Angus. It's so sad he passed away.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a gentleman, such a pleasure, beautiful man, very erudite, and loads of stories. But just such a gent. It's really
yeah. I got to meet him very, very kind of brief. I think I may have told the story before, but basically we were at a Days of the Dead convention, and Angus Scott was there, and of course you have a party on the Saturday night. And he was in his 80s then, and it was like, he was there at the party making sure, and the organizer was saying, "Listen, Angus, we don't expect you to be here. You must be tired," because he'd spent a whole day talking to fans and so on. So, no, I'm fine. I just and he just stands there, this beautiful, elegant man.
He's always so well turned out.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. Always absolutely looking wonderful. A couple of other questions that have come in whilst we've been talking. This is from Kim. Hi, Kim. She's actually got two questions. Jake, what was your inspiration for the film Razor Blade Smile?
Well, obviously, I grew up watching vampire movies, basically Hammer horror vampire films, really. They used to be late night on BBC Two pretty much all throughout my childhood growing up. And those are probably the films which were my sort of bread and butter horror that I grew up with. And after I'd left film school, I was writing some scripts, and I was trying to get a script off the ground to make my first feature film. And originally I wrote a zombie film called The Dead and the Damned, but I couldn't get any producers. I'd only made short films before this point. So when I showed this film to producers, at this point, this is back in, this would have been like 1993, something like that.
Right.
94. And at that point, it's amazing to say this now, but nobody was making zombie films. Now you can't move for them. Like, it's, every fucking other film is a zombie film. But back then, nobody wanted to make zombie films, and producers just weren't interested in it. But also, because it was a zombie film, it would have been quite expensive in terms of the amount of makeup effects and work that it needed. And the amount of money I could get I just couldn't raise the budget for that. So I thought, well, I love vampires, in fact, I love vampires more than zombies. But so I thought, well, actually, a vampire is actually a lower budget creature if you think about it from a budget perspective, because
teeth,
fangs and blood, and they're very stylish. But that makes it easier because you don't have to do hours and hours of prosthetic makeup work. So in the end, I only had 20 grand. That's all I could raise, and we shot that film on 16mm with a crew of 8. And but that came from my love of vampires, which I then kind of crossed into my love of comic books, because in the 80s, I grew up as part of the first, probably the generation of people that really got into comics, with stuff like Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and all these kind of great writers were writing in that format. And for me, that was just another thing that I loved. And because I didn't have a lot of money, I just thought, well, I'll just try and do something kind of comic book and fun, and just really, just throw as much style as I could, because on the limited resources we had, we weren't going to be able to afford to get like great actors and stuff. So it needed to be something that would be a bit of a laugh. So really, it was just combining my kind of interests of vampires and comics into one thing. And in some ways, and this has been said by quite a lot of people, the Lilith Silver, there's vampire assassin with 2 guns. She, in many ways, is actually the template that got stolen for the character in the Underworld series. The Celine character is essentially visually pretty much a rip-off of Lilith Silver. So in some ways, maybe I helped put that
influenced
into the public consciousness in a very low budget way before obviously Hollywood took it and then made something much bigger and more successful than my little effort.
So how old were you when you made it?
I was, when we shot Razorblade Smile, it was 1996 when we shot it, so I was 26 years old.
Right.
So I was about 25 when I was writing the scripts. So yeah, I made my first feature at 26 years old for 20 grand, and I took a promo of that from, basically we shot it on film, and I had all of the rushes transferred onto what was actually Beta SP at the time. I don't know if people out there really know the formats, but that was a broadcast format, and I was working for a company editing trailers anyway. So basically at night time they let me use the edit facility for my own film. So when they finished around 6, 7, I would go in and then be there all night cutting my film. So and I did that for about 6 months because I could go in and use their edit. So I couldn't afford any kind of other way of doing it. So I was like a method editor. I was like a vampire. I was up all night editing, then go home when it became daylight and hide away until the next day that I could edit again. So it was an interesting process.
I'm sure, absolutely. And it is a fun film. And it's very, I kind of think of it as it's a really nice lads movie, basically.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, to me, it's weird because it's also it's like an interesting. I think it kind of captures the goth scene at that point, and there was like the vampire scene, and some of the locations it was shot at, like the Transylvania bar, which was in West Hampstead. That was just around the corner from where I lived at the time, and a lot of the people in there are from the London Vampire Group. And we used a lot of fetish stuff, which was, once again, using rubber gear as clothing. That stuff was not in the mainstream at that point, and that was quite risque. And we used some of the top designers of rubber stuff. So the catsuit was Murray and Verne. Some of the dresses were basically really the kind of proper. So that was all from the pages of Skin 2, basically. That stuff hadn't really been seen in a lot of movies before, So we were trying to, so if you look at it from that point of view, it's a kind of an interesting record of a snapshot of that sort of goth vampire scene, which doesn't exist in the way it does now, because times have changed, and that seems to have gone a bit, really. But so if you want, it captures London at that point, which I think is quite nice.
Yeah, funnily enough, obviously through the Hellraiser connection and so on, I remember Skin 2 magazine very well. Yeah.
Indeed,
yes, yeah. And that was a really fascinating scene.
Well, that whole kind of whole subgenre was kind of interesting, So I used to go to a lot of things like Torture Garden Club and things like that at the time. So it was sort of part of that scene as well, which is in the movie a little bit.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I don't know if I certainly went to. I think it was probably a Skin 2 big event.
Every year.
The rubber ball. Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah, they had that yearly thing.
Yeah. And actually, my boyfriend at the time modelled a wonderful dress.
Fantastic.
Actually, a quite famous dress, because it ended up in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series as the inspiration for a dress worn by Death, and was actually, and then we used it in Mortigan Goth, a comic I wrote. So this dress, which was designed by Talana, Gamar, and Aish, some mates of mine, and the dress is, appeared in a number of comics.
That sounds fantastic. I mean,
it's wonderful.
That imagery was really strong, and obviously I love playing around with that kind of stuff. So that's a bit about Razorblade Smile.
Okay, cool.
Did that answer the question all right?
It did. I think yes. No, I think we actually answered that very fully. And then Kim's second question actually kind of goes back to when we were talking about the extras on movies. When doing the extras on Blu-ray and DVD, do you get to decide what features go on them? I presume this is a collaborative process, is it?
Well, it depends on who we're making them for, basically. So if we're doing it for our own releases, so for instance, when we released a film like Ghost Story, which is the Stephen Wiggs film, I mean, we had carte blanche to do whatever we wanted to do it because it's our own release. So we wanted to do a really in-depth thing about the making of it and got as many of people from the film as we could get hold of. And we did it's about a 72-minute sort of, or 90, it's about 90 minutes as well, actually. And it's a very, we really like to do as in-depth as we can. But when sometimes it comes to other films, so for instance, we did stuff for Angela's Ashes recently, very different, with Sir Alan Parker. And Alan Parker, he loves talking about his work and he's really engaging, fantastic guy to talk to. But it's impossible to get hold of most of the talent from those films because they're not in this country, they're in the States, or they want too much money for doing it. So we in that case, we built the interview around him. But he's so great, that worked brilliantly. So it really depends on the budget, how much time you have to produce them, and who it's for. So often with Arrow, we'll be doing stuff like for the Hellraiser box set, and there's some stuff on there which some stuff we had made some years ago called the Under the Skin documentary pieces, which were their interviews with your good friend Doug Bradley, who I've worked with as well. And that's Doug talking about stuff. But we originally did that stuff for the Anchor Bay release back in the 90s or 2000s. I can't remember the exact date, but it's up on my shelf as well. The Cube set.
Yes.
So Arrow licensed those off us, but they also wanted us to make some new stuff. And we're trying to figure out some stuff which hadn't ever been done, and that's always the hard thing. So for the Scarlet Box set, we finally got hold of Sean Chapman, and I'm sure you know Sean, who played Frank in Hellraiser 1 and Hellraiser 2.
To be honest, I don't think I've ever met him.
Oh, maybe you were never on set with him.
We're never on set with him. I know he started doing conventions recently, so I do hope to meet. I'm really hoping next year.
He's a terrific actor. I mean, he was in Dumb as well.
Oh God, yeah.
Really, really lovely man. But he had never gone on camera and talked about Hellraiser before for 30 years. So we got the first interview with him ever and really went into depth about. And there was, because there were he had a few issues with the film. He wasn't, we wanted to get the real story behind it as well, because he got in the first film he got dubbed by another voice, and he wasn't happy about that at the time. But
of course not.
He talks about that. It's a good performance, and he's got a lot of presence, and he's a very good actor. But he talks about the warts and all of it, and that's what we really wanted to go into as much depth as we could. So if you've got the Scarlet box set or the new Arrow release of Hellraiser, they're on there, the Sean Chapman interviews. And also we were looking for something else which we felt would be interesting, would be the music. And because originally, I don't know if you know this, but there was an unused score done by a band which Stephen Frower was in, a band called Coil. Did you know that for the first one?
Yes, I've heard the stories.
Yes, well, we've been friends with. Yeah, we're friends with Stephen Frower, and Steve. I mean, a lot of horror fans out there will know who Stephen is because he wrote brilliant books about Jess Franco as well as the American kind of horror indie scene, and he's great. But he's a musician, so he talked about the story of the original unused score and his friendship with Clive, and so once again, giving people an insight into aspects of maybe Hellraiser that they weren't aware of before.
Sure. And
we even put a little bit of the music that they'd done. It was never completely finished, but we put a little bit against some of the scenes, and so you had a little tantalizing glimpse of what it would sound like.
I know. I'm completely ashamed, but I have my copy of it, and I can keep on looking at it on the shelf and say, I really do need to sit down and just watch a few. I've watched some of the stuff. Yeah.
There's a vast amount of extras on there, though.
Yeah, including I think they've taken in some of the Leviathan.
That's right, the Leviathan thing, because the challenge is that Leviathan had covered so much ground.
Yeah.
So when we were speaking to Arrow, we all said, well, look, what we could try and do is do the bits which the Leviathan still was missing a couple of things, like Sean Chapman.
Yeah.
They hadn't got him. The original Coil score, they hadn't got Steve. So that's how we approached that one, to try and find stuff that. So it's always trying to come up with something that is going to add to the package into the film, really. So that's how we go about it when we're doing it. So it really depends on if there's a brief, but also how long you're going to have to make these things. Because if they say, right, you've got to make something, but we need it in the next few weeks, so it really depends who's available within that time frame. So there's a few different considerations when you're making extras, but that's kind of a pretty sort of rough beat by beat way we would approach them.
Right. That's right. I'm just typing a message to Craig because you've reminded me about something. So that's very interesting. And then one of the questions that's come in from Derek as well. How do you find marketing when you release your films? What is the challenge and what's changed about marketing when
It
you're
would.
releasing your films now?
Is Derek talking about my feature films or stuff like Nucleus?
I think it's not specific. Let's stick with Nucleus, I think.
Okay. Well, with Nucleus, I mean, what we've found, it's really, we will work with. I don't know if you guys know Greg Day, who's part of the Fright Fest.
Yeah.
Greg does all the PR for Fright Fest, and he does all my personal PR. But we as a company work with Greg, and he does press releases for us, which basically means when we do a press release, we will release that to all of the horror sites, all of the fan sites, and DVD and Blu-ray sites that cover that kind of material. So that will go out with the details of the release, and when it's coming out, there'll be links to trailers and artwork and things like that. Then we'll be available for interviews. So something like the Video Nasties release, which was one of our bigger releases for Nucleus, we then did a lot of interviews, stuff like this on websites, and stuff for print magazines, stuff, Dark Side magazine and Bizarre magazine, which is no longer, I don't think. There's less print magazines than there were now, so everything seems to have migrated online. And now these days, the biggest thing for promoting we're finding now with the crowdfunding stuff that we've been doing is actually Facebook is really one of the best ways to reach out to the community, because there's so many different groups on there on Facebook now. So you can have your own Facebook page, but you can also post stuff on different fan pages. So we were really utilizing that for the crowdfunder. So everything's becoming more and more online based. But we still try and do anything we can. If we can get into print media, if we can get any exposure outside that, you're always trying to hit as many different people as you can, so that's
do you use paid advertising on Facebook or just rely on?
We basically will use obviously we put stuff out as well, but then you can pay to promote posts.
Mm-hmm.
So we will do promotions, and that'll get you across platforms outside your groups. So I don't know if many of your listeners have done that, or if they run companies, but you can pay for boosting your posts if you've got a company page, and we do that. So I think as an example, with the crowdfunding campaign, the video that we put up was we put a couple of bits of video content up, and the video with the boosted post, I mean, we got over 10,000 sort of views on that, which is pretty good, so stuff like that. But Facebook is something increasingly we're using. Twitter is something we're beginning to use. We're not quite as good with Twitter yet, being restricted to however many characters it is. Trying to find that quite difficult still, but we are using Twitter, but we haven't quite nailed Twitter yet.
It's something I'm looking in launching the podcast and doing the podcast. I'm always fascinated by this stuff and so on. And I think for indie filmmakers, you look at the amount of money that is it's like, hey, boost your post. I think you bastard, you used to be able to do this for free. I know only 16% of my followers get to see any post because I don't have the budget to promote stuff.
That's true. The thing is, Nick, you never know. Also, I mean, when you do boost a post, to be honest, you never know exactly what the impact of it is.
No.
But one thing, with the crowdfunding thing, we could see that we were getting more orders. So, you're thinking, well, it probably is worth it. And, you can boost it by the amount you want. I mean, they're sort of fairly small. You can go 20 quid, 40 quid. So it really depends how much you want to spend. I mean, but back in the days, if we're paying for a print advert in a magazine, it's considerably more expensive, So we try and have a presence with, as like, for instance, also with advertising, we've got strong relationships with Fright Fest, for instance, and for the crowdfunder, the Fright Fest were having their Halloween event, and we asked them if we could play our promotion video at the Prince Charles Cinema in front of the last film, and we went down there and introduced it. So that got the word out to the Fright Fest audience. So I think with any promotion, you're just trying to reach out to the core group of people that are interested, and if they start talking about your stuff online, then that tends to spread the information. So I think that utilizing social media is a way forward with anything kind of independent sort of wise. When I'm doing one of my films, the promotional aspect isn't controlled by me. If it's being released by something like Doghouse, for instance, was released by Sony, so they have their own P&A budgets, and they'll get me to do interviews, and I'll do like a press junket or something, which is completely different, where journalists come along in a short period of time and you interview them, but they'll also have access available for the performers in the film. So if you've done you've done press junkets, they're kind of weird and crazy things which are sort of condensed into one day.
Yes, I've done once. Grim up north, never as much as you think. Okay, cool. As we knew, we're kind of moving towards the end of the show. We've got about another 20 minutes or so.
Oh, it's gone so quickly.
It does. I know, but it's been fascinating, and thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Nick. And it's nice to do this. We talked about it some time ago, so we actually got it sorted out.
But just sharing the stuff about marketing, because I was talking to, I was at the Fright Fest drinks last night, and I was talking to quite a few fellow filmmakers, and they were just saying how much they enjoyed the show. And one of the things is because it's just being able to share what everyone is going through and the tips and tricks of what works, what doesn't work, and so on. The other thing, I mean, we're going to talk about Pumpkinhead, Ashes to Ashes, Doug Bradley. We mentioned earlier on, and we will come back to that. But one thing I really do, I watched again the documentary on the video Nasties. That you did. It was amazing work.
Yeah, I've got them here. In fact, just look. A bit of shameless plugging, but there you go.
Yes.
Video Nasties 1, Video Nasties Volume 2. So,
what is the difference between the two? I've watched the Video Nasties 1.
Well, this one, the first one, Video Nasties 1. This covers the period from when home video. Sort of the birth of home video, which is like about sort of 1977, 78 through to 1984, just before the Video Recordings Act and everything became regulated. And then this one picks up the story from 1984, from the enaction of the Video Recordings Act through to 1999, which is the Thurman years when censorship was its heaviest in this country. So there's two, it was too big a story just to do in one documentary. And also there's the original Video Nasties list of 72 banned films, which is from the first one. And then on the second one, you've got what was called the Section 3 list, which we unearthed as we were doing the first documentary, which was a list of another 80-odd titles. So it sort of naturally split itself into two parts. Although when we did the first one, we never thought about the second part. It's just we realized there was more of the story to tell after we'd done the first one. So it's just one of those things. It took us about 3 or 4 years to get the second one made after the first one.
Right. How long did it take you to make the first film?
Yeah, the first one took about 2 years.
Right.
The main thing was just tracking down all of the right people to interview. So we would interview somebody, and then we go, it would be really nice to interview the head of the Obscene Publication Squad from blah. Oh, well, how do we find him? You've got to track him down, then arrange a date. Then trying to get an interview with someone like Graham Bright, the MP, was difficult because he was suspicious of doing it, but he eventually said yes, and we went to his home. And so as you're building it, and every time you get new material, it kind of changes. You have to change the cut because it makes an impact. So a lot of it was, we had hundreds of hours of stuff when we shot. Yeah, it was a massive post-production job, really. But the research aspect of it is the thing that takes such a long time for something like that.
Yeah, what I love about it, because I lived through this, and I remember seeing it's tremendously complete. You do give both sides of the argument. What I mean, it's very clear where your heart is. Oh, yeah. But it's a very fair balance, I think.
Well, I think the thing is you've got to, with a documentary, particularly with something like this, which is based on the history of what happened at a certain time, you have to present both sides of the argument in terms of what was happening for it to actually have meaning, really. Because in a sense, what is shocking about the whole Video Nasties thing and the documentaries when you watch them is the fact that this stuff happened in the first place. It almost seems unbelievable that MPs were throwing up in Parliament because they were watching horror films and stuff like that. But that stuff happened, and dogs were being blamed because even they were disturbed by Video Nasties, and the stuff that was being said is just ridiculous. So it's the truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, and I'm finding about why people felt like that and how it affected their lives. And it's an interesting one because obviously a lot of the people we interviewed in the film, are filmmakers as well. People like Chris Smith and Neil Marshall, and people like myself, we watched those films as kids, and it actually influenced us in a very positive way, that we all had careers in the horror films and stuff like that because we loved them. So in a sense, that kind of sense of adversarial kind of sense set up by the powers that be made us more passionate about this material, in a sense. So maybe it was good for us.
I think what I found absolutely fascinating was watching it again this week was the fact that it really what it really demonstrates is the manipulation of media and the press, the lies that were told. I remember that vividly, the headline that 40% of children under 12 years old had seen a video nasty.
Yeah, it's complete. It's such sensationalism. What it shows us, and I think what it taught us as a generation of growing up in that period, it told us to be very suspicious of these tabloid headlines as well. And literally, they would just print anything that they could just to make it sound extreme. You know, and those Daily Mail campaigns and stuff, you could feel that kind of hectoring tone about wanting you to be controlled and fearful of this stuff. And when you actually watch the video nasties, you're like, well, it's not really going to bring about the end of society, is it? You know, kind of like I'm watching Evil Dead.
It's interesting. I mean, Evil Dead, I think, is really, because again, I didn't get to see it because of the act, and for years I'd thought I'd seen Evil Dead 1. I hadn't. I'd seen Evil Dead 2, which is basically because it was
Evil Dead 1 is such a great movie. It's such a great independent film. And
it is a great, but I have to, there is one sequence that I am very uncomfortable with.
The tree rape scene.
The tree rape is. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. Well, I think, but Sam Raimi has spoken about that subsequently, and you know, he feels that maybe he was only 18, 19 years old when he made Evil Dead, and you can see that he felt maybe it was a bit juvenile and a bit silly, and he says he regrets it, but in a sense it did reflect maybe an 18, 19-year-old making a film. I mean, he's not exactly going to be, he's not like the fully formed article, you know, he's a teenager, and let's face it, a lot of teenagers do worse things than, and I don't think tree rape is something that people are genuinely worried about. No. Even tree huggers probably aren't worried about it. I mean, it's not something that happens in the real world, you know.
No. I think what it is, it's the attitude towards women that I think it's I find the thing that comes across very strongly in the documentary is that the way the Obscene Publications Act is written, and this is something I had to deal with in my own, you know, because there was a raid on a comic shop, Gosh Comics, and Alan Moore's From Hell was seized. Was seized because it showed penetration. It shows it in the really, really tiny, I mean, literally on one's at the bottom, you know, a big thick graphic novel, there is one tiny little panel, which if you look really closely, you can see penetration. They seized that.
But it's not real penetration, it's a drawing in a comic book about...
Precisely, yes, absolutely.
About Jack the Ripper, and when you think of all the things the way that Jack the Ripper eviscerated his victims...
Yes.
And completely destroyed, you know, like, you know, sort of gutted and, you know, pulled out organs. I don't think like an inch drawing of penetration is really something to get too het up about.
Precisely, and it's the way that the law is.
Yeah, well, the Obscene Publications Act was a very sort of dated way of trying to approach some of these problems, and you know, in the past it had been used to ban stuff like Lady Chatterley's Lover and stuff like that, and it was always a bit of the wrong tool to really be going at video nasties for. But on your point, you know, if the video nasties have a problem with them, it probably is just the sort of misogyny that is involved in the worst of the video nasties. That misogynistic streak is in some of those films, but I think that also did reflect the time that these films were made in. It reflected where society was at, whether we were comfortable with that or not. If you look back at, you know, the 70s, it was a very unreconstructed time in terms of this, and now maybe we've gone too far the other way. We're too PC to the point where people get offended at the drop of a hat. So it's kind of like, in some ways, you know, this is the thing about horror films, is always where's the line where people are going to be, this horror film should make people feel uncomfortable as well. You know, it's kind of it's duty to get under your skin too. So sometimes it really depends on the audience watching it, but you know, when you obviously someone like Mary Whitehouse, you know, a sort of lady in her 70s is not going to react that well to cannibal Holocaust in the same way that a teenage kid watching it at 16 thinks it's quite enjoyable. So it really depends, you know, it really depends. It's like, I doubt the film was made for Mary Whitehouse and, you know, somebody with extreme religious views and stuff. So it's it always comes down to who the audience is. And, you know, I personally don't feel that, regardless of people being offended or not, I don't think that these films made people more violent. Personally, I think that that's something was invented by the media because they wanted to restrict things and, you know, have more censorship control over people. But to me, that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I was going to say is that the bill is phrased, it has a tendency to deprave and corrupt.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that we always, but the censors are allowed to watch it. So that therefore that means that they are depraved and corrupted because they're the front line of people making sure that it doesn't filter through to you.
Yes.
You know? But I think that real life is the thing that depraves and corrupts people. It's not.
I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman, Michael Dean, yesterday, a filmmaker, and we were talking about one of his projects, and he was saying that as a young man in his 30s now, in his experience, the world today is probably more scarier than any other time because what is going on.
But is that just because we have so much more information about the world today coming at us constantly through the lens of our computer, and you know we're bombarded by this happened here. Because
because I think as human beings we're always interested in, because I mean I grew up during the Cold War, and I was very, you know, and it's. Yes, I don't think it's the medium itself. I think it's the fact of the way that the election went in America. And I think it's very specifically about Brexit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all of these things are shocks in the system, aren't they?
Yeah.
But people, obviously, we react. Obviously, we feel the sort of concussion of reaction more once again because of social media. Because in the past, imagine the same events had happened: Trump, president, Brexit. But if we couldn't all talk about it online, you would just get what you had in the newspapers like you did in the video Nasties era. So it would be them pumping up whatever people's opinions were. But I think that the change in media has changed the sort of consciousness and the way that we feel these events sort of have repercussions around us. But I actually think pretty much every time in history has so many terrible things going on in it. And it just depends if you're lucky enough geographically to be born in a certain place or not, because you know if you're born in a country which is being ravaged by war, then your entire experience of life is going to be coloured by a society which is crumbling apart. You know, and we're very lucky in living in the UK at the moment because you know we think back to the last war that really affected people was the Second World War in the sense of a day-to-day reality, and look at people are still talking about that, and do you know what I mean? And imagine that was something that was present happening now. So I don't know. I mean, I hear that I think that times are always scary, but as horror filmmakers, we also need to embrace that fear and distill it and send it back to people.
I think you're absolutely, and this is the point that Michael was making. You know, the film we were discussing is about, if it's about zombies, it's about prejudice. You know, and that's what and this is why I find it an absolutely fascinating project we were discussing. And it's like, you know, we're talking about a reflection of society, and this is why it's very interesting, and I think very dangerous to the powers that be. This is why they want to suppress it and control it, because they want you to very nicely stay at home, consume stuff, and just do as you're told.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Kim, you've got some very interesting questions. I'll try and squeeze your question in.
Try shorter answers if you like.
Yeah, we're going to do short because we've got about 6 minutes to go. We may have run a bit, but I do want to try and keep
okay, yeah, sure. I'll answer quickly. I'll
answer quickly.
Go on less of a rant.
No, it's very good. I think. I think. Kim, I'm going to rephrase your questions because you're talking. Kim's asking about the way retailers effectively censor by not stocking certain films. Do you think there's anything that we can do about that or should be done about that? Because obviously it's up to a retailer. They decide they will probably stock something that will sell rather than.
Yeah, the problem. I mean, the biggest problem is actually just the lack of shops which sell. You know, for us, you know, back in the days when we first started releasing stuff as Nucleus Films, we had Tower Records, HMVs, you know, lots of independent stores which would sell DVDs and, you know, Blu-rays. But nowadays, there's very few places which actually left that sell physical media, so to speak. So the most people get a chance to buy DVDs now is if they go to their local supermarket. But supermarkets don't stock stuff like we release, and it's not because of censorship. It's just they only do chart titles, they only do mainstream stuff, and that's just because they have very short turnaround on those discs. So I'm not sure it's censorship in quite the same way, because I mean, in the UK, I mean, we have to go to the BBFC, and if we get like an 80, you know, it has to, if it's got a BBC certificate on it, which it has to have to be legally available, then it just depends on whether an outlet wants to stock your thing. So, you know, some stuff has marginal interest, but something like the video Nasties, for instance, when we released that, we couldn't get that into supermarkets because somebody like Sainsbury's or Tesco are not interested in releasing stuff which is sort of too niche. They only want mainstream. So I'm not sure it's censorship, but it's just because there's a lack of retail space. But pretty much everything now, once again, it's on online model. So the majority of sales we do for Nucleus is pretty much through like Amazon and, you know, other kind of websites, basically, people that stock stuff. So for any independent film, it's always tricky. But if you've got, I mean, in the UK, you have to have a certificate. So that determines legally it can be sold anywhere if it's got a certificate in theory. But whether a shopkeeper will order it depends on them.
Yeah. It's you know, they know their customer base, and let's face it, you probably don't want that at the eye level of a 4-year-old wandering around.
I mean, that's the whole thing with any like the whole rating system was designed to do that in the first place. But certainly, yeah, I mean, if you've got Sony releasing your film, it's going to get bigger exposure than an independent company releasing it, because they've got the push. But once again, if your film stars, you know, Brad Pitt, then that people want to buy that. If my film stars Nicholas Vince, yes, there's an audience for that, but the Brad Pitt audience probably isn't the same audience. You know?
It's larger apart from anything else. I do want to talk about, and we are going to overrun, let's say 10 minutes or so. Is that all right? Have you got time?
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Cool.
As long as you're there.
Yeah. No,
not go to bed yet, have you, Nick?
No. I've got other stuff to do. I've eaten. No, I'm all right. I've eaten. I was going to say, talk about, the last thing I would like to talk about is Pumpkinhead, Ashes to Ashes, with Doug Bradley, the wonderful Doug Bradley. How did you get involved in that?
Well, I had made my second film, which was Evil Aliens at that point, and Evil Aliens got invited to play at the Toronto International Film Festival as part of the Midnight Madness strand, which is a massive festival. I don't know if you've been to Toronto.
No.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So we played Midnight Madness there, and that was a screen of about like 1,400 people. Like, it's crazy. That kind of, you know, Canadian, North American audience, they just went wild for it. That was great fun. But because of that, I got approached by the Horror Channel, as they really liked Evil Aliens, and I'd also been recommended to them by Mo Claridge at Anchor Bay at that point, and he knew a producer who had got the rights to the Pumpkinhead franchise, which is a guy called Brad Cravoy, because he had produced the second Pumpkinhead sequel, Blood Wings, and he still owned the rights to it. And then them via the Sci-Fi Channel wanted to do 2 more films, 2 back-to-back Pumpkinhead sequels, which were going to go out as part of Sci-Fi Originals, you know.
Right.
So it's a combination of being recommended by Mo Claridge, and then the Sci-Fi Channel, the lady I met at Toronto had said, oh, they really like Evil Aliens, but Evil Aliens, they said, would be too offensive for their audience. Would I be able to do something, you know, less? So I said, well, it just depended on the thing. And when they initially spoke to me about Pumpkinhead, I mean, I loved the first film. I think Pumpkinhead is a fantastic movie. It's a really great story. It's got a great creature. Stan Winston did it. So I thought, well, that would be like a really nice universe to sort of play in, given the opportunity. But I was a gun for hire on that. So they originally hired me to do both of the sequels back to back, and I was asked to write some sequels for that. And myself and, once again, another collaborator, a guy called Mike, forgot forgotten his surname now, which is terrible of me. He'll come back. But me and Mike, we wrote 2 scripts, but they were rejected by the Sci-Fi Channel and being on the grounds of being too ambitious. Because with the Sci-Fi Channel movies, they have like quite tight budgets, but you have to shoot within like a 19-day period for that. So even when I've done Razor Bay Smile, I was shot over like 23 days. So 19 days was quite a short amount of time. The difference is obviously you had a full crew and stuff like that, and you could get better actors. So for me, it was really a chance to work with like Lance Henriksen and Doug Bradley. And we actually shot the film in Romania due to some tax break thing. So we ended up shooting the film in Romania, doubling for America. Half of the cast are Romanians, so they could only learn their lines phonetically, and then they had to be redubbed. So in many ways, for me, it was like I wasn't happy with the final film personally. I think it's got its moments, but I loved working with doing all of the creature suit effects and working with Doug. And obviously working with Doug was great for being a big Hellraiser fan. I got a chance to geek out and hang out with him and find out Clive and what you guys went through in the makeup room. And, so it was good, it was good in many ways, but that was my Pumpkinhead experience, really.
Right. I was watching it again this afternoon. I have to say, Doug's Southern accent is great.
I think Doug is one of those great, he's a great actor, and he can, he takes every part he does very, very seriously, regardless of the film. And I think that's the thing about Doug. He's a consummate professional, and he's a great actor. So he really enjoyed doing that. And it was, like I said, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to work with him.
Sure.
And he was relieved, obviously, that he wasn't in any sort of makeup.
I was thinking exactly that same thing as he was looking at some of the people, the people in their makeup. I thought, I bet you're really grateful at this moment.
Well, the guys that did the suit, they were the guys that basically had done the later Hellraiser films as well. So
it was Gary Tunnicliffe.
Yeah, Gary Tunnicliffe. Yeah, so Gary obviously didn't do the first one, but he had done all of the sequels, the Dimension sequels. So obviously Doug was very familiar with some of the guys on the makeup team, and I think he always was happy to be able to walk past that chair without going into their trailer. He liked hanging out with them, but he just didn't want to be in there for hours.
Yeah. No, it's a fun. I can understand. That does sound really, because this is a big film. I mean, you've got some big effects there. You've got creatures. You've got. There's a big set piece with fire and
absolutely. Well, the thing is that we were ambitious as we could be with the budget that we had, but for me at that time, I mean, I had come to that having just made Evil Aliens, which was basically a film which was made for £287,000. So this one was over $500,000. So for me that was a big step up, but it was still they made these Pumpkinhead 3 and 4 back to back, and Michael Hurst did the 4th one in the end. So for me, that was still a big budget, and we shot it on 35mm film, ironically, for a film which premiered on television. So it's kind of like that was actually shot 35mm, and I worked with a really great DP, and we had a lot of toys and kit and stuff like that. It's just, for me, I was never really happy with the story of it, and because of the way we had to shoot on the Romanian side, not being able to cast actors when their first language was not English, and trying to get performances from people, and it ended up being for me, it was just a bit of a mishmash. And the visual effects stuff, the Sci-Fi Channel CG stuff is horrendously poor as well. And we're trying to avoid it as much as I could, but the bits that we did do were very, very basic, and I've never been happy with that stuff, and it just ruins the film for me, that kind of thing. So, for me, it's the least Jake West of my movies, basically.
Yeah, I have to say, like, you mentioned Evil Aliens. I did get the homage to Cannibal Holocaust.
Oh, good.
I thought, yeah.
That was quite a rig for that, actually.
I'm sure.
That was a complete physical body where the spike literally does go through the mouth, which opens up on a whole back piece that went back. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. I mean, it was it's always nice if you can homage Cannibal Holocaust. It's so rare these days you get the chance to do it.
Yeah. I can understand that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Jake, we have run out.
Okay.
We are. There are a couple of things before we go, but so just to remind people, Nucleus Film, Death Laid an Egg, Lady Frankenstein, in
Yeah.
demand on Indiegogo. And the best place to find out about that stuff is the Nucleus Film website,
Yeah,
or
the Nucleus Film website, or really the Facebook page is great as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were doing so. I've saved this for last because I just wanted to a little bit of a shout out. I just wanted to say thank you to Dead Mouse Productions for my copy. I think that's, yeah, let's cover my face. For the Fright Night, You're So Cool, Brewster.
So cool, Brewster. I can't stand it. I love Fright Night, man.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, I love it.
Is that the documentary?
That's the documentary with
I want to
Simon.
see it.
Yeah, with Simon Bamford playing Roddy McDowall, playing Peter Vincent.
How wonderful!
And I mean, I was fortunate enough to do a day doing some. Basically, what the guy said, you know, for DVD extras, what we're going to do is we're going to do the trailers for the films of Peter Vincent that are referenced in the movie or the comic, which came out of the Fright Night movie. So I got to play Vincent, Peter Cushing, Peter Vincent.
Peter Vincent,
Christopher Vincent. I basically
something like
that. Christopher Lee, Peter Vincent. Yeah, absolutely. No, I wasn't Peter Vincent. I was Christopher Cushing. Christopher Cushing. Christopher Cushing. And some dodgy wigs and so on, but really had a really good time. And
so where can we get hold of that?
That's from the good question. Dead Mouse Productions. I know they've shipped out stuff. I'm not quite sure of their distribution, but if you go to find Dead Mouse Productions or Cult Cinema, but if you look up "You're So Cool, Brewster" documentary, you can Google that.
I would love to see that. That looks great. Really.
Yeah, they've you know, the thing is that I think they learn. We mentioned Leviathan earlier on. They learned so much from their experience about doing Leviathan that they put it's a much shorter documentary.
Well, I have actually met the guys because I did meet the Leviathan guys at one point, and that was at Fright Fest, I think, actually.
Yeah.
So it was this year that I saw them. So I didn't know that they'd done that, but that was terrific. Love Fright Night. Love it.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm just going to wrap up in a couple of moments and just remind people my monthly newsletter will come out next week with next month's shows. I've actually got all the shows lined up for next month. There'll be 3 shows in January, but I'll tell you more about that. And also on the Chattering with Nicholas Vince Facebook group, they'll all be posted there as well. But you can sign up for the monthly newsletter. And really, I just want to remind people that next week I'm going to be still chatting with Stu Jopia, Stuart Bedford, and Giovanni Gentili, the director, producers, and co-writers of the award-winning Christmas horror thriller Good Tidings, which is on the festival circuit at the moment. I have to say it's a good film. It's a really, really interesting film. And it's a perfect Christmas horror film as far as I'm concerned. I really enjoy chatting to the guys with that. Jake, thank you so much indeed for coming.
You're welcome. No, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, and hope everyone enjoyed it.
Good, I'm sure he did. Right, this has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince. I have been chattering with Jake West. Join me next week for the guys from Good Tidings. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for watching and now listening on the podcast. Take care, folks, and good night.
Good night.
Wherever you are. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. If I can.